Hello, I'm your host, Marcus Garrett. Every week I have entertaining conversations with your favorite influencers and entrepreneurs. Now, let's get started with this week's show. Okay, 3, 2, 1. And this is The Drop. Season 3 of The Marcus Garrett Show is focused on the journey from employee to entrepreneur. You can find a link for a free 30-day trial to join thousands or hundreds already in our office hour program, thousands on our newsletter. In your video description or show notes below, find a direct link. And this is The Drop. I'm here today with Ibekwe Law, but you can call them your lawyers gone right. Their team is composed of professionals who are mothers, daughters, sisters, aunties, and friends. They pride themselves on clarifying estate planning decisions and confidently preparing breadwinning women just like yourself. Well, welcome to the show, Iffy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Marcus.
Not a problem, not a problem. We're going to jump right into the life after debt segment because living life and living debt-free do not have to be mutually exclusive goals. So I think the obvious question to go into, is what is estate planning?
Right. This is such a great fundamental question because I think when people think of the concept of estate planning, they think estate. It sounds so grand. It sounds so vast. It sounds like money, it sounds like means. But the truth of the matter is each of us has an estate, and it's comprised of your person, your physical body, any property that you own, your children are part of your estate, your business is part of your estate. And estate planning is essentially having a plan of action for all those components. Because if you don't have one, each and every state in the United States of America has an estate plan for you, which means that the government already has a scheme for what to do with you, your property, your kids, your business, etc. And so it's to your benefit to make the plan yourself so they don't have to default to their own.
So I'm going to ask for, let's say the person of no means, because I'm sure they have some doubts, so I've got a pit bull, a PlayStation, and some Nikes. Like, why do I, or a person like that, need an estate plan?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And it's a good question. The reason that you need an estate plan is because even if you just have debt, maybe you just live in your mom's basement, right? Let's just go a step lower. Someone still has to know what to do with anything that you own. If you are in some sort of a medical emergency or crisis and you cannot consent for yourself, someone has to know what to do with you, what to do with your healthcare decision making. During COVID, I remember reading about this 30-something man in New York City, and he ended up being in a terminal condition and they could sustain him by life support, and his parents didn't agree on what to do. One of the parents wanted to just let him go, and the other one was like, nope, by no means necessary. That had nothing to do with how much money he had, whether he had a pit bull or PlayStation or Nikes. It's just healthcare decision making, right? If you're in that situation and you still want to make sure that you have a place to live when you come out of a coma or something like that, you need someone who's going to be able to access your bank accounts, pay your rent, and be able to pay your car note if you have one, things like that. And they don't have automatic access unless you plan for it ahead of time while you are in good health. So that is completely independent of whether your investment portfolio looks like it should and whether you've gotten that first property or second rental property in this ridiculous housing market. Or Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I'm not talking about any of that. Fundamentally, you need a plan of action for you, right? Everyone who's 18 who can have the capacity to make the decisions for themselves, which means that you're not under a conservatorship or anything like that. You need an estate plan because there has to be a plan of action.
That was a great response. And I think especially tying in the health component, I think health with the pandemic is at top of mind for everyone. So I definitely appreciate that. I'm going to transition a little bit here to my super special featured guest executive producer question. My mama.
Okay. Yeah.
My mama had like 5 questions that she wanted me to address on this show. So shout out to my mama who does watch the YouTube channel.
Hey,
I appreciate
Mom.
the support. And so her question number 1 was, what is needed for estate planning?
Right. This is a great question. An estate plan, if you think about it, I always use the umbrella example. The umbrella is the estate plan. And underneath it, there are certain components that are housed under the title of an estate plan. And that includes things like an asset distribution document, which is a last will and testament, or it could be a trust, right? Basically, something that says, this is what I want to happen to my property when I pass away, right? You want to know, say in that same scenario, you don't really own anything that's like worth and much, but look around your house, look around your apartment, look around your condo. What's on the walls? What about your plants, the furnishings, any collectibles you have, whether that's shoes or purses, jewelry, artwork, dishes, um, anything that is of value that might be in a niche, collectors, people would know that that's worth something, like these tchotchkes that people have. Some of them are worth a lot of money, and you might know, what do you want done to those things when you pass away? Where do you want them to go, right? So you need some sort of asset distribution. Last will and testament is what you think of when you think of a will. A trust is another way to manage the distribution of property, and that's something that can be passed on for a long time. You also need healthcare directives, like we just talked about. If you are in a medical emergency and you are in a hospital, you can't consent for yourself. What kind of medical treatment do you have? Do you have moral or religious influences that need to be known? And who's going to be in charge of making those decisions for you? Who is going to understand these moral and religious things that are of importance to you, right? Some people want to be on life support. Some people don't want any CPR because they may have a medical conditions with brittle bones. Some people may not believe in artificial feeding, right? So make sure you put those things down, and you can plan those ahead of time and designate someone to be in charge of making sure that your wishes are followed. So you need medical directives. You also need medical directives to make sure that the right people have access to your healthcare documentation. Because it's not a given that, oh yeah, my best friend and my sister, that she just calls up, the doctor's going to give it. There's something we have called HIPAA. And if you've gone to the doctor, dentist, chiropractor, any kind of healthcare practitioner, you have to consent before they can even release information. So that's part of the planning. Financial planning is important. So if you have bank accounts, investment accounts, any sort of financial account, who's going to have access to those to help you pay for things, or to help you, if you're even out of the country, depending on the state you're in, make financial decisions on your behalf. That's called a financial power of attorney. A lot of people know power of attorney. It can be called a property power of attorney. It could be called a statutory durable power of attorney. All of these documents, these legal documents, which are comprised, that comprise your estate plan, are different. They're called different things in every state. And so I'm trying to give examples of what it might be called in your state. That's part of your estate plan. Planning for your children. In Texas, we have something called standalone guardianship. So if you're ever incapacitated, you can designate who should take care of your children. When you pass away, you can also designate who should take care of your children. You can have a first choice, you can have backups. All of that is part of your estate planning process, making sure that your kids are good. Same thing for your health. If you are ever incapacitated, we've just heard about Britney Spears coming out of a conservatorship, I think after 13 years. I know Amanda Bynes, another actress, is coming out of one, allegedly. And then Wendy Williams might be going into one, right? So these are just pop culture references of people who are not able to manage their affairs or their physical body, or maybe both. And in advance, if you are ever in that situation, you can say, you know what, I pray to God I'm never in that situation, but if I am, I want this person to be in charge. And then this person, I don't want this person to be in charge of my physical body or any of my financials or assets, right? That's part of estate planning. And it even goes all the way to planning for funeral arrangements, whether you want to be buried or cremated or turned into a diamond, which there's a company that does that in Austin. or whether you want your ashes scattered in 5 Caribbean islands. I've done a plan for that one. And I was like, can I take the ashes to these meaningful islands and do that for you? And so these are all parts of the estate planning process. And it goes into even more detail because everyone's individual. Everyone has their own things. They own certain things. They want to make sure that how things are passed on are managed in a certain way. And so that's what we do as estate planning lawyers. We help them figure it all out and get it on paper legally so that when that time comes, they have all their documents, all their ducks are in a row.
I knew I would, because you're answering so many questions I wouldn't have even thought to ask myself. I wrote down here because I would have gone for cremated. I think the missus has some objections to that, but this turned into a diamond thing. I'm gonna
Yes.
double underline that and circle it. I'm gonna come back to that.
You can be turned into a diamond. You can have your pet turned into a diamond. You can even plan for your pet in your estate plan too. And so there's so many options. People have had themselves taxidermy. So if they're poker players, they're like sitting at a poker table. I mean, it's really creepy if you go on Google and search this stuff, but a lot can be done according to your wishes. Whatever it is, probably someone else has already done it. So
I love it. So you had mentioned earlier, I think this was under asset distribution. So I wrote down more so when it's what about I said owned, but more like unknown. So let's say I buy some Bitcoin or something like that. You talked about the younger gentleman. I think I remember that story, who was incapacitated at like age 30. So let's say I buy some, now the popular is NFTs. I buy some crypto. So that's unknown value. Can you assign things with unknown value?
yeah, I mean, if they will allow it, and I'm not a cryptocurrency or NFT specialist by any stretch, it's an emerging field that planners are planning for. But just like any other investment, you want to make sure that it allows you to designate a beneficiary of that.
Okay.
So that's why there's been some controversy, with some of these companies that they're like, yeah, just do it on your phone. But then if that person passes away, you can't get access to that account because they had no mechanism for transferring. I won't name names, but there's some companies that they won't have transfer rights upon death, right? And so when you think of assets, we have stuff called non-probate assets, and those are things like investment accounts, life insurance. What happens when someone dies is that you put a beneficiary down. Upon producing that death certificate, they're going to transfer that account over, cut a check, and give that asset over to the recipient, the beneficiary or beneficiaries, if there are multiple ones. And so with cryptocurrency and NFTs, if you're thinking in that vein, how is it going to be transferred? That's what listeners who are interested need to figure out. What's the transfer when I die? Who gets it next, right? Not just let me accumulate it and say I have it, then what? Because it could be like art. Art appreciates. It's arguably one of the fastest appreciating things you can have is art. And so if you give someone your art and it's appraised at the time that you create your estate plan at X amount, when you die, it might be worth 10. You don't know. You don't know when you're going to go. And you just want to make sure that as part of your estate planning process, you're going back and reviewing those things. If you're getting other appraisals, if you know it's worth this, let's look at what that would mean if I were to go today. So I tell people every 3 to 5 years, or if there's any sort of a life event, you lose a loved one, you have a new child, you retire, you need to have that thought to keep looking at all of not only your estate plan, but all your financials, your assets, to make sure that it's still working for where you are at that current moment.
Okay, I think you hit my other one here, so I'll move back to my executive producer's questions. So we talked about a lot here. What is the cost?
Yes, this is a great question. So estate planning is not inexpensive, okay? You can find it, and it depending on your assets, estate planners that will do your estate plan probably starting in the low thousands, I'd say on average, right? When you start adding things like living trusts and you start dealing with children maybe or loved ones who might inherit that have special needs, that cost is going to go up. Now, a lot of people have been looking at AI options for doing their estate plan. And in the past, I've said that don't do that. And I still lean that way because I really haven't seen where it's being done well to protect the consumer. These companies that will say, yeah, we'll do your will, they disclaim at the bottom of their website that this is not a law firm and this is not legal advice. So what I have seen in my office is when people come in and they want to update their estate plan, and they're like, I'll bring what I already did on, LegalZoom, right? They bring it in and it's never been executed. It was never notarized. It wasn't signed. And so what they have are drafts because they never completed it. Wow. And that is essentially, you just have the state's plan. Like your state will decide what to do with you because it wasn't properly finished. And so I'm not saying that people can't do those things, but when you start dealing with all the things that you have as far as people who have a lot of assets, right? Or if you have a child with special needs and you don't have any assets, you could really mess them up if you go the cheap route, because you actually need more expertise. So it really depends on the nature of the services that you need. And I would say it would start in the low thousands. For me, definitely, as I speak and I just do estate planning and probate in my practice, that's the cost of it. Meeting with a lawyer is expensive for, no one wants to meet with a lawyer to do an estate plan. It's not like a real estate closing where you can say, I just got a new house, or you're like, your Bitcoin is up, or whatever people love to post. It's rare for people to post that, yeah, I actually have secured some peace of mind. I've secured my children and my grandchildren now, right? I think it's better, but it has to deal with your coming to terms with the end of your life. And so that can be very triggering, or people have already gone through a mess when somebody did an estate plan because it was too expensive, or they just didn't get to it. And now it's a part-time job to figure out how to close it down without creditors getting everything, or everything having to be sold, or the lawyers getting paid, because we will get paid before your heirs will. So it's to your benefit. Like if you have a visionary mindset and you can do a long game, it's better to look down the road and see how this will benefit in the long term versus wanting to do, something for short term just because it's cheap. It's your life, it's your legacy. And so people will value what they see value in and invest accordingly. It is an investment, though.
A lot of more great information. I think the one that's going to jump out here, my audience, is predominantly personal finance. So is there, I guess you would have to speak loosely, is there protections you can put in place to protect either yourself, spouse, or family from creditors?
Yes, there are protections you can put in place, and from taxes too. Currently and I'm sure your listeners are all over the country. So each state has different tax laws. There are federal tax laws, there are estate taxes in some states, and then there are federal estate taxes, and then some states have no estate tax. And so, mind you, I'm not saying state, I'm saying estate with an E in front of the word state, right? So in Texas, for example, we don't have a Texas estate tax. And so that means that you can hand off property willy-nilly, right? We are just under the federal tax exemption, which is it's 12.06 million per person in fiscal year 2022. That's a lot of money.
Right.
That's a lot of money for most, I would say almost everyone coming and getting estate planning done. And so if you're under that threshold, or if you're married, that number is going to be $24.12 million. That's a lot of money to be able to pass on without taxes. Okay. And property, assets, anything, right? But there are other states like Massachusetts, I believe, that has a state tax that I believe is about $1 million. Don't quote me on this. I'm not a tax attorney. So you need to know what it is in your state. And that's the nuance in planning and wanting to protect from creditors or taxes. You have to work with someone who is going to understand what you are working with and the best way to structure it for our current tax laws, for our current setup, to make sure you can pass it on to your loved ones in the most efficient way possible. One thing that people do is they'll have life insurance and leave it to minors. So at your job, or maybe you bought $100,000 life insurance and you just have it going to your 2 kids outright. Well, if you are under the age of 18 in the United States of America, you cannot receive assets that way. You have to have a custodian or some sort of trustee in charge of it, which means that you need to have a trust set up, whether that's within your will or outside of your will, in order to receive that asset for the benefit of your children. And so those are little mistakes that people make that end up costing them. If you even know that that's something that you could pass on, that $50,000 if you have 2 kids is a lot of money for that child, right? But when you have to go, you may not know about it because people don't like to talk about what they're planning about. And then if you do know about it, now you have to hire a lawyer, right? Because you have to establish who should be in charge now that that parent is not there, right? Who gets the asset? And it's a mess. And so while people want to spend as little as possible, the cost on the other side of not planning can be absolutely catastrophic. I'll give you another example on a financial. I know you asked about creditors, but on a financial tip on this, I don't sell life insurance, but I have a friend whose mother passed away and left life insurance to her sister, so my friend's aunt, for the benefit of my friend who was a minor. Okay. What ended up happening is that aunt passed away with that money. After the mom died, the aunt inherited it, the auntie died. Guess where that money goes to?
I'd assume her family.
Absolutely, because she didn't have an estate plan.
Right.
And that niece, while she might be somewhere in the air, if everybody like went down on a cruise ship, she got disinherited.
Wow.
Because they didn't want an estate plan. They just thought, oh, I'll just give it to my sister. She knows me like my, she'll do what's right by my child. But when you hand money over to people like that, they're trying to buy a house in this market. Right. Okay, like that. I could add an extra $50,000 to my home offer. I can invest that in something. But people and money, okay, yeah. Tale as old as time. And so these are the reasons. Even when you have very trusted people, you don't know what's going to happen to them. So you want to put structures in place that are stronger than that. And so those are some of the things that are the real practical consequences that people don't like to talk about, but it helps when you plan for them. I have so many stories. I don't want to bog you down with them, but it's just, I could give you so much, honestly.
No, I love the story. I think it brings in the point as a really, you had my eyebrows up there.
Yeah.
So the question from my executive producer here, these are actually great questions. I had no doubt that they would be.
Of course.
It says, who keeps a record of the plan?
You do. And depending on your state, that might be different. For my clients, I don't keep records for them because to prove up a will, you want the original. And so I give them the originals, and I can give scanned copies as well, but they keep them. And so that's how we've done it. Historically, people would store them at the courthouse and things like that, but there's a lot of people. And so it just depends on your state. I know for Texas, you can have your own copy. I have mine in my closet, and you can put it in a fireproof safe. Just let your executors know where they can find it, and give copies of anyone that's helping you, whether it's for medical decisions. The executor is the person who basically closed down your life, or your trustee if you go the route of setting up a trust. Just let those key people have a copy, and then know where originals are kept too. Okay.
And I think that answers this second question. If something happens, I asked the question, if something happens, who does the family contact? And you're saying the executor?
Yeah. So if something happens, if someone passes away, then, you want to contact the executor, or if you have a trustee, the trustee, if they don't already know, and they're the ones who will spring into action to start the process.
Okay, nice. That concludes my executive producer's questions. I'm going to pay some bills around here, then jump into part 2 of the Marcus Garrett Show.
Sure.
The Marcus Garrett Show is made possible by our partners like Terry Igioma. Terry's a stock and options trader who encourages their over 100,000 Instagram followers to pursue their passion. Her system teaches students how to intelligently and responsibly invest in the stock market, with some making up to $1,000 a day. Hear our chat and learn more when you visit themarkets.com/investwithterry. And now, back to the show. So I actually heard from you originally. I mean, we all in the same spaces. Who knows how many times we've crossed paths from 6 degrees of separations? But for me, it was the shout out to Yo Quiero Dinero podcast. You'll have a link in your show notes. You can get a link to that direct episode. It's also a great podcast to listen to. I've recommended a number of times at All Star Money in my personal finance podcast recommendations. This was episode 127. And let's see here. I see if these questions are still relevant because I pulled them several months ago now. Okay. All right. I'm going to change it up a little bit, but how do you comfortably or respectively start these conversations? You had talked about planning ahead, but it's still uncomfortable. So do you have any tips or tools for just starting the conversation with your family, friends, peers?
Yes, I absolutely do. I also have some resources on my blog, which I can give you a link to, so you can put those in the show notes as well. But to start, I think the best thing to do is to do your own estate plan. And the reason I say that is if you're speaking to elders in your family, that can be a role shift, right? Because they've taken care of you and now you're trying to tell them like, look, there's going to be a time where I may need to take care of you, or that you may need to take care of certain things. And it's a very, for the unprepared, it's a very intimidating question, or it could be. And depending on your cultural background, like for example, my family's from Nigeria. I was born in Nigeria. And so you don't talk about death like that because it's almost like you're trying to put death on someone. And that might be the same, like depending on your different cultures. Then you also have to take into account like the trauma that it might bring up, right? There are people who have had parents that they took care of, that they saw in their decline, right? Like you're talking to your parents and maybe your parent has taken care of your grandparent in this condition. And then when that grandparent maybe passed away, everything was a mess because they didn't do everything right. And it might bring up some kind of feeling. So don't feel like it's a one and done. I say start with having the conversation yourself. Next, guide them and say, hey, what do you want to be remembered for? If they have grandchildren, I always feel like grandchildren are a great pull-in. What do you want your grandchildren to know about you? Have you ever thought about your legacy? What do you want us to do with your property? Now, there are going to be some people who will be like, what? Why are you asking me this? Do you know something? Did you have a dream that I'm no longer going to be here? Or they might just be defensive because generally it's a confronting question, right? You're not going to say, what are you going to do with your stuff? We don't want to mess, right? You want to come in with grace and say, here's something I've done. I've done my estate plan, and it just got me thinking about legacy and how I want to leave things to the people that I care about, my children, my institution, maybe charities. What do you want your legacy to be? What would you like to be remembered for? Have you ever thought about it? Have you ever thought about who you'd want to help you, as you age? Like, what are your goals, and your loved one. So whether this is your spouse or whether this is a parent or this is another loved one, just start the conversation, start talking, just plant a seed and just water it and wait. There are some people who will take to it and say, yes, I have been thinking about it. My job offers estate planning. I know I should sign up. I'm going to make a meeting, right? And then there's some people who are going to be confronted and don't want to talk about it. They don't want to do it. They're like, you're going to figure it out when I die. Y'all will have to work it out yourselves. I won't be here. That's a very common answer. I don't care because I won't be here. But essentially what that's saying is, I don't care enough to make sure that you can preserve your relationship when I'm gone, that you can preserve any of my assets or things that I have left you when I'm gone, because I don't care enough to deal with that. And that's where you see the breakdowns of families, siblings, other siblings robbing their parents' homes when they die and saying, well, mom told me I'm supposed to get all the rugs. They go in, they clean out stuff, right? You've heard stories like this, I'm sure, Marcus, where you just see a mess. Right. Where is this kept? The mom said that I was supposed to get this. Nothing's written down. Everything's a mess. some wayward persons coming in and cleaning out the bank accounts. I have so many stories of that one, getting their names put on the account so they can own it as a joint tenant and just withdraw money, or taking advantage of an elderly parent and saying, "Yeah, I want to help you. Let me do a financial power of attorney," cleaning them out in that way, robbing them. And so it is to your benefit, especially when you're talking about, I'm in my 40s now. So when I'm thinking about my parents, and my father's passed away, but my mom's already done her estate plan. She actually just redid it in Louisiana. I didn't even do it for her. I didn't even remind her. Her
Nice.
lawyer did. She's
Yeah.
just updated it because we're now all adults, and she has us with various roles in her plan. But one of the things we have to do is make sure we're following her wishes,
Right.
right? And that nobody is coming in. And of course, I trust my brothers, and we get along very well. And part of it is having a conversation, communication. It could be awkward, and it could be painful, just to even think of, oh my gosh, there might be a time when you're going to need me to help you physically, or there's a time where you won't be here. Like, it's unfathomable to me, but it is coming for all of us. And so this is an ongoing conversation. Bring it up when you're around each other. Talk about it when you're sitting around, with family, and try and get a larger conversation going, if that will work for your particular circumstance.
That was excellent. Now I'm looking at this next question here. So I'm going to ask both. I tend to try to do this in life, definitely at work. I try to end on an up note. No matter how dark
Yes.
or deep we go with the podcast, I try to end on an up note. So I'm going to ask both questions because we could potentially go deep and I'll run out of time. I'll be like, well, it's nice having you on the show. And people are like crying at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask both. You pointed out on that episode, I think it was 127, did I say, of Yoki
Mhm.
Urbanero podcast, and I'll find a way to get this in the show notes through the magic of editing. It'll probably be on the screen, that Black and persons of color net worth is on pace to hit 0. I put
Yes.
it in all caps by
Yes.
2054 from a 2017 study.
2053
Oh.
for Black people and 2073 for Latino, Latinx community, according to I believe the report came out in 2017 from Prosperity Now, and you can Google it, or you can add those to the show notes too. And this is prior to the pandemic, which has decimated our communities the most. And so,
Well, hold
while
on. Let me
yeah,
ask question 2, because
yeah,
I don't know how deep we're going to go here. I'll run out of time.
yeah,
So question 2 is going to then be, and how and where can we find estate planning lawyers of color? So that way, no matter how
okay.
dark we go, I'll
We're
let you
gonna
know if we
end
get
on
to
the
like a
up.
5-minute warning. We're going to end on an up note. So
Yes.
go ahead.
No,
Prosperity
that's
story
just
from
a
2017.
yeah, it's just a statistic that
Mhm.
shows that there is an increasing wealth gap. And conversely, white wealth on average, I believe right now, the latest numbers, it's in the high 100s. As our wealth declines, the average white family's wealth continues to grow. And of course, there are systemic and historical reasons for that, where people don't have to be as alert as we do, right? Because the system is just built like, you'll be okay. I mean, generally, if you're white in America, you're going to be okay unless other circumstances affect you. And so if you're Black or brown in America, that's not the case, right? There are so many inequities currently in our system, and we're seeing it where we're not able to accumulate and pass, or even just maintain and pass on assets, even if it's an asset, right? Because if you're starting from behind the starting line with every generation, that's how in 50 years and in 30 years we're going to be in a crisis, right? And what does that mean for us as a people? I don't know that estate planning on its own is the solution, but it is a way to protect your asset and be able, or assets, right? Even if it's just helping your grandmother preserve her house so that developers don't take it, right? Or they don't exploit it. And so what can you do in order to preserve that legally, the way that white people do, so that you can pass it on to whomever you choose, or let it go to wherever you choose. I have a friend right now, her father passed away, and he left her a house that was his mother's house. She's an only child, and that's her inheritance, is that house, right? And the part of Georgia that they're in is gentrifying really well and turning it into Airbnbs and investment properties, and investors are coming from all over the country and world to buy. And it can be very tempting to just be like, yeah, I'll take but instead she's like, I'm going to make it my own investment property. I'll put money into it and start doing what they're doing in order to preserve it. But she has a legacy there. That's their home, right? So it's either you sell and you leave and then you don't have that real property anymore, or you do something to keep it and, find ways to maintain it and make it sustainable and profitable if you can't live there, so that at least you can hold on to it. And so depending on what your goals are, these are the little micro decisions people have to make, right? Because you may just have that one thing, but do you want to preserve it? Because right now it might be inconvenient. You might be all the way across the country, but you have that one thing, or you have that swath of land, or you have those 2 acres, right? How do you keep that? Because it's not just your generation. There's someone coming behind you, right? And so that's kind of how I feel about it. It's going to take a miracle, but there are things that can be done now that will help move the needle.
I love it. I don't feel that was too dark. That's actually very
No,
informative. I appreciate that.
A call to action, I hope. I hope ears that can listen will hear it, because
those
we
that
often
are ready for the message
yes,
to receive. Yeah, I
but
understand.
those who have ears hear, right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that don't discount. Stop saying you don't have anything. Stop saying you don't have anything. That mentality that you don't have anything is already the bleeding of, even if you consider it little, it's the bleeding of what you have, right? Preserve it. Because while you may not value it, the next generation might value it. They might be like, you know what, that 1/4 acre in downtown Austin, that was money, right? How do we band together and keep that in the family, no matter what? How do we go to those meetings and fight for our land, right? That's what happened in Austin. And now all you see are condos and high rises, and people pushed out because the property tax was too high, because they wanted condos and high rises. And so just little things like that, just to be informed and just know, like, that little shanty, it might be worth nothing, but it's sitting on something, right? And so that's my call to action for those of you who have it. Preserve it, if you can.
And in addition to yourself, obviously, we're moving towards the wrap. Where or how can we find estate planning lawyers of color, and tell people a little bit about yourself and where they can learn more about you?
Yeah. So you can find estate planning lawyers all over the United States. I speak prolifically about culturally competent estate planning, which is being able to find a lawyer that's going to hear you, that's going to value what you have and what your family's trying to preserve and protect it. And that can be hard. I have a list in my Instagram. You can find me at Iffy, Ibekwe, ESQ. And I have a list of estate planning attorneys, Black estate planning attorneys throughout the United States. And this is a list that I update from time to time, but it's just my list, just to give you a starting point. It doesn't mean that you will end up with these attorneys, but sometimes just having someone who's culturally competent can help. I will let you know the statistics for Black attorneys, for those listening, only just under 5% in the United States, 2% women. 86% of the lawyers in America are white, and consequently, they don't always serve us. And when it comes to estate planning, we're such a niche in law that a lot of those lawyers will end up working with high net worth individuals, family offices, which are like ultra wealthy families like the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilt type names, right? Or Kardashians and more current. And so it can be hard to find someone just willing to work with you. But I encourage you to keep looking and book those consultations and talk and interview them like you're interviewing for anybody else who's providing you a service. And feel free to reach out to me. You can DM me on Instagram and let me know if you're having trouble, and I could ask my wider network and see if I can find somebody who may not be a person of color, but who might be aligned with the mentality to help you in your state.
And I hear you've got a book coming out soon. Can you tell the people a little bit about that?
Yes, I am writing a book. The working title is called Willpower, and it is a book a how-to guide for estate planning that is going to be available to just regular people. It's going to have tips on how to find lawyers and what the documents that they need, how to protect their children, how to have conversations with family, how to get other people in your community fired up about getting their estate planning done, so we can really work towards, just destroying these numbers of 70 to 80% of Black people and brown people not having an estate plan. And so that's a resource that's coming out in 2024. I know that sounds a long time away, but publishing is slow, and hopefully it'll be a good first start for people who just really want to understand what they're getting into before they go ahead and get their estate plan.
So I'll go ahead and keep me accountable. The audience could do the same. Sounds like a good excuse to have you back on the show on or before 2024.
Yes. And then if you want to find me, I'm in Texas and Arkansas. So if you're a Texas resident or an Arkansas resident, my law firm can certainly help you. You can find me at ibekwelaw.com, book a consultation. I'm happy to speak to people and just help start the process. It is an investment, I will say that, but it is a worthy one, because you're talking about your generations. You're not just talking about, what you're going to do this summer and pay that much to go to Disney. It's like going to Disney, but it'll last a lot longer.
Well, I hope I have satisfied the ask from my executive producer and those wonderful questions that she provided today. For a shout out on upcoming shows, sound off in the comments with your questions. But remember, I only read questions from 5 stars reviews. And your favorite quote from today's episode. Your reviews help more awesome people just like yourself find the smooth sounds of the Marcus Garrett Show. Thanks for coming on the show, Iffy.
Thank you for having me.